What if you held the power to shatter a corporate giant with a single phone call? For Dr. Serafina Cephii James, a titan of venture capital, this wasn't a fantasy. After being brutally dragged off a United Airlines flight by security, the humiliation turned into fuel. Before her feet even touched the tarmac, she didn't just get mad, she got even. On that same night, she orchestrated a financial earthquake, pulling a staggering $5 billion in funding from the airline's latest venture. But what happens when revenge unleashes a karma so swift, so devastating it threatens to consume everything she's ever built? Dr. Serafina Cephii James was a name that echoed with a quiet yet formidable power in the hallowed halls of Silicon Valley. She wasn't just a player. She was the player, a kingmaker in a world of ambitious dreamers and ruthless innovators. Her firm Innovate and Elevate was more than just a venture capital entity. It was a launchpad for the next generation of technological marvels. Cephii, with her razor-sharp intellect and an uncanny ability to see the future in a nascent line of code, had cultivated a portfolio that was the envy of her peers. Companies she'd backed in their garage stages were now household names, their logos emblazoned on the devices that shaped modern life. Her journey, however, had been anything but a gilded path. Born and raised in the often overlooked neighborhoods of Compton, California, Cephii's early life was a tapestry woven with the threads of struggle and resilience. She was the daughter of a high school teacher and a mechanic parents who, despite their modest means, instilled in her an unshakable belief in the power of education and an insatiable hunger for knowledge. From a young age, Cephii exhibited a prodigious intellect, devouring books with a voracious appetite and displaying a preternatural aptitude for mathematics and science. Her brilliance was her ticket out, but it was also a burden. She was often the only black face in her advanced placement classes, a solitary figure navigating the often choppy waters of academia. The slights were subtle, the microaggressions a constant hum beneath the surface of her daily interactions. Yet with each condescending remark, each underestimated assumption, a fire within her burned brighter. She learned to be twice as good, twice as prepared to leave no room for doubt about her capabilities. A full scholarship to Stanford University was her first taste of the world she now dominated. She excelled, graduating summa cum laude with a degree in computer science before going on to earn her PhD in artificial intelligence from MIT. It was during her time at MIT that she met Dr. Evelyn Reed, a trailblazing black woman in the tech industry, who became her mentor and lifelong friend. Evelyn saw in Cephii a reflection of her own younger self, a brilliant mind with the potential to change the world. She taught Cephii the unwritten rules of the game, how to navigate the treacherous currents of a predominantly white, male-dominated industry. After a successful stint as a lead engineer at Google, where she spearheaded the development of a revolutionary machine learning algorithm, Cephii decided to strike out on her own. She founded Innovate and Elevate with a clear vision to identify and nurture the next generation of tech innovators, with a particular focus on underrepresented founders. She knew firsthand the barriers that existed for people who looked like her, the doors that remained stubbornly closed. Her firm was to be the key that unlocked those doors. And unlock them she did. In a few short years, Innovate and Elevate became a powerhouse, its portfolio boasting a dazzling array of companies that were disrupting everything from healthcare to finance. Cephii's reputation grew with each successful IPO. Her name whispered with a mixture of awe and intimidation. She was known for her rigorous due diligence, her incisive questioning, and her unwavering belief in the founders she backed. But she was also known for her fierce loyalty and her commitment to ethical business practices. In a world often driven by greed and short-term gains, Sefi played the long game. Her success afforded her a life of luxury she could have only dreamed of as a child. A sprawling mansion in the Atherton Hills, a fleet of luxury cars, a wardrobe filled with couture. But these were mere trappings. What truly drove her was the desire to create a legacy, to build something that would outlast her, to pave the way for others to follow in her footsteps. This burning ambition is what led her to a pivotal meeting in New York City. She was on the verge of closing the largest deal of her career, a multi-billion-dollar partnership with a consortium of international investors to fund a groundbreaking green energy initiative. This project was more than just a financial transaction. It was a chance to make a real, lasting impact on the world, to combat climate change, and create a more sustainable future. The final negotiations were to take place in person, a testament to the magnitude of the deal. It was on the return flight from this career-defining trip that the carefully constructed world Sefi had built would be violently shaken, the carefully controlled narrative of her life irrevocably altered. A simple request, a moment of misunderstanding, would set in motion a chain of events that would test her resolve, challenge her principles, and force her to confront the very nature of power and its corrupting influence. The woman who had risen from the ashes of adversity was about to face her fiercest fire, yet a crucible that would either forge her into something stronger or consume her completely. The hum of the Boeing 777's engines was a familiar lullaby to Sefi. A seasoned traveler, she had long ago mastered the art of finding a modicum of comfort in the transient world of airports and airplanes. She settled into her first-class seat on the United Airlines flight from Newark to San Francisco, the plush leather a welcome embrace after a grueling week of negotiations. The New York deal was a monumental achievement, the culmination of months of tireless work. A quiet sense of triumph washed over her, a rare moment of repose in her perpetually forward-moving life. She had just finished a call with her lead legal counsel, confirming the final details of the Green Energy Fund. The conversation had been a complex dance of legalese and financial jargon, and she wanted to review the key points one last time before the celebratory champagne began to flow. She reached into her briefcase and retrieved her noise-cancelling headphones, a vital tool for creating a bubble of focus amidst the controlled chaos of air travel. As she slipped them on a flight attendant, a woman with a tightly wound bun and a name tag that read Brenda approached her. "Ma'am," she said, her voice sharp, "you need to put your phone away. We're preparing for takeoff." Sefi, still half immersed in the intricacies of the legal document on her screen, looked up. "Of course," she replied, her tone calm and respectful. "I'm just finishing up a work email. I'll be done in a moment." Brenda's lips thinned into a straight line. "Ma'am, the captain has instructed all passengers to turn off their electronic devices. Now." There was an edge to her voice, a condescending tone that pricked at Sefi's carefully cultivated composure. It was a tone she had heard countless times before, the subtle inflection that questioned her legitimacy, her right to occupy a space of privilege. She took a slow, deliberate breath, refusing to let the woman's attitude rattle her. "I understand," Sefi said, her voice still even. "As I said, I'm just finishing up." She turned her attention back to her phone, intending to send the final crucial email before powering down. This, it seemed, was an act of defiance Brenda could not tolerate. "Ma'am, if you don't turn off your phone immediately, I will have to ask the captain to intervene." The threat hung in the air, thick and unwarranted. Sefi looked around. Other passengers in first class were still on their phones, their conversations a low hum in the cabin. A man across the aisle was engrossed in a video game, the sounds of explosions and gunfire a tinny accompaniment to the escalating tension. The hypocrisy was glaring, the selective enforcement of the rules a stark reminder of the unspoken biases that so often governed such interactions. "I will be happy to comply," Sefi said, her voice now laced with a steely resolve, "as soon as you ask every other passenger in this cabin to do the same." Brenda's face flushed with anger. "Are you refusing to follow a crew member's instructions?" The question was a trap, and Sefi knew it. She had been in enough boardrooms, enough high-stakes negotiations to recognize a power play when she saw one. "I'm simply asking for the rules to be applied equally," she stated, her gaze unwavering. The flight attendant, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, spun on her heel and marched toward the cockpit. A few moments later, she returned flanked by two burly men in airport security uniforms. The sight of them, their presence, an immediate escalation of the situation, sent a ripple of alarm through the cabin. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his voice a low growl, "you need to come with us." Sefi's heart pounded in her chest. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding. It was a public spectacle, a humiliation playing out in front of her fellow passengers. She could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and in some cases a chillingly familiar flicker of schadenfreude. "On what grounds?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain composed. "You've been deemed a disruptive passenger," the officer replied, his hand resting on the taser holstered at his hip. "Disruptive," Sefi's voice rose in disbelief. "I was sitting here quietly working when this flight attendant decided to single me out." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The officers were not there to listen to reason to de-escalate. They were there to enforce, to remove the perceived threat, to restore order. And in that moment, the perceived threat was a black woman who had dared to question authority. "Ma'am, we're not going to ask you again," the officer said, his voice now laced with menace. Sefi knew she had two choices. She could continue to protest, to fight for her dignity in the face of this gross injustice and risk being physically assaulted, or she could swallow her pride, endure the humiliation, and live to fight another day. Her mind raced the years of training, of learning to navigate a world that was not always welcoming kicking in. She thought of her parents, of the sacrifices they had made. She thought of Evelyn, of the lessons she had learned about picking her battles. And she thought of the deal, the multi-billion-dollar green energy fund that hung in the balance. A public arrest, a messy legal battle would jeopardize everything. With a heavy heart, she unbuckled her seatbelt. As she stood, one of the officers grabbed her arm, his grip unnecessarily tight. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound of both pain and outrage. He began to pull her down the aisle, the other officer close behind. The walk of shame was excruciating. The faces of her fellow passengers swam before her, a blur of judgment and indifference. She saw the man who had been playing the video game, his phone still clutched in his hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. She saw the smug satisfaction on Brenda's face, the triumphant glint in her eyes, and she saw something else, something that chilled her to the bone. The quiet approval in the eyes of some of the other passengers, a silent affirmation of the unspoken belief that she, a black woman in first class, was somehow out of place, that she had gotten what she deserved. As they reached the door of the plane, she was met by a representative from the airline, a man with a clipboard and a practiced, insincere smile. His name, she would later learn, was Mark Callahan, a mid-level executive with a reputation for being a fixer, a man who specialized in making problems disappear. "Dr. James," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "We apologize for any inconvenience. We'll be happy to rebook you on the next available flight." The offer was a slap in the face, a pathetic attempt to smooth over a gross violation of her rights. The inconvenience, as he so casually called it, was a public humiliation, a stripping of her dignity, a stark reminder that no amount of success, no amount of wealth could protect her from the insidious tendrils of racism. As she was escorted off the jet bridge and into the sterile environment of the airport terminal, a cold, hard fury began to replace the shock and humiliation. The woman who had built an empire on logic and reason, on calculated risks and strategic thinking, was now consumed by a raw, primal emotion. They had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated her. They had treated her like a common criminal, a disruptive element to be summarily dismissed, and in doing so they had unleashed a force they could not possibly comprehend. She pulled out her phone, the very object that had been the catalyst for this entire ordeal. Her fingers flew across the screen, her mind already working, calculating, strategizing. The deal, the Green Energy Fund, was her leverage, her weapon. They had tried to take her dignity. Now she would take their future. The first call was to her lead investor, a man who commanded a significant portion of the fund's capital. The second was to her legal team. The third was to her public relations firm. The wheels were in motion. The storm was coming, and United Airlines, in their arrogance and their ignorance, had just flown directly into its path. The fluorescent lights of the airport terminal hummed with an indifferent, sterile glow, a stark contrast to the inferno of rage that was now blazing within Sefi. The initial shock of her public expulsion from the flight had given way to a cold, crystalline fury. Mark Callahan, the United Airlines fixer, was still attempting his placating dance, offering platitudes and travel vouchers as if they could possibly paper over the chasm of disrespect that had just been opened. "Dr. James, please let us find you a comfortable seat in our lounge while we sort this out." He offered his smile as plastic as the chair he gestured towards. Sefi turned to him, her eyes like chips of obsidian. "Mr. Callahan," she began, her voice dangerously calm, "you seem to be under the misapprehension that this is a customer service issue. It is not. This is a corporate governance issue. This is a brand identity issue. And as of this moment, it is a multi-billion-dollar financial issue." Callahan's smile faltered. He was used to dealing with irate passengers, not titans of industry, who spoke in the language of his CEO. Sefi didn't wait for his response. She turned her back on him, a clear and deliberate dismissal, and walked towards a quieter section of the terminal. She found a deserted gate area, the silence a welcome respite. She sat down, not in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, but on the floor, leaning her back against the cool glass of the window that overlooked the tarmac. The plane she was supposed to be on was still there. A behemoth of metal and machinery, a symbol of the corporate arrogance that had just tried to crush her. She pulled out her phone. Her first call was to Robert Chen, the notoriously shrewd and influential head of the Hong Kong-based investment firm that was the primary anchor of her new Green Energy Fund. Chen was a man who valued two things above all else: profit and reputation. He was also a man who had faced his own share of prejudice in the Western business world. "Robert," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We have a problem." She recounted the events of the past hour, her narration precise, devoid of emotion, a clinical dissection of the injustice she had just endured. She didn't have to embellish. The facts themselves were damning enough. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Chen finally spoke, his voice was laced with a chillingly calm anger. "Serafina, this is unacceptable. United Airlines is a partner in the new shipping logistics company we are both invested in. Are they not?" "They are," Sefi confirmed. The airline's cargo division was a key component of a new technologically advanced shipping network. They were building a project that was almost as significant as the Green Energy Fund. "Then they have not only insulted you, a respected colleague and a leader in our shared venture," Chen continued. "They have insulted me. They have demonstrated a profound lack of judgment, a corporate culture that is not only morally bankrupt, but also a significant liability." He paused again. "I assume you have a course of action in mind." "I do," Sefi replied, a grim smile touching her lips. "The Green Energy Fund. The full $5 billion. We pull it. We issue a press release tonight. We make it clear that we cannot, in good conscience, partner with a company that so blatantly disrespects its customers, particularly a company that has shown such a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior." She was referencing a string of recent highly publicized incidents involving United Airlines and its mistreatment of passengers, particularly people of color. Her case was not an isolated event. It was a symptom of a much deeper disease. "Consider it done," Chen said, without a moment's hesitation. "My team will begin the process immediately. The press release will be on your desk for approval within the hour. We will make an example of them, Serafina. A very public and very expensive example." The call ended. Sefi felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The first domino had fallen. Her next calls were to her legal and PR teams. The message was the same: prepare for war. The legal team was to begin drafting a lawsuit, not for a paltry settlement, but for punitive damages, for a sum that would force a public reckoning. The PR team was to craft a narrative to control the story before United Airlines had a chance to spin their own self-serving version of events. She knew they would try to paint her as the aggressor, as the angry black woman, a tired and offensive trope that was so often used to discredit women who dared to speak out. But she had the truth on her side, and more importantly, she had the power to make them listen. Within the hour as promised, the press release arrived in her inbox. It was a masterpiece of corporate warfare, a carefully worded statement that was both a condemnation of United Airlines and a declaration of her own unwavering commitment to ethical business practices. It announced the immediate withdrawal of the $5 billion Green Energy Fund, citing a fundamental misalignment of values and a lack of confidence in the airline's ability to operate with the level of integrity and respect that we demand from all of our partners. The language was cold corporate and devastatingly effective. She approved it without a single change. As the news broke, the financial world went into a state of shock. A $5 billion fund being pulled overnight was unheard of. It was a financial earthquake, and the aftershocks were immediate and brutal. United Airlines stock began to plummet in after-hours trading. The phones in their corporate headquarters would be ringing off the hook, a cacophony of panicked investors and bewildered executives. Sefi watched the chaos unfold from the quiet solitude of her self-imposed exile at the deserted airport gate. She had been offered a private jet by a sympathetic fellow investor, but she had declined. She would fly commercial on a different airline, a silent act of defiance. She was not above the fray. She was in the thick of it, a warrior on the battlefield she had created. The CEO of United Airlines, a man by the name of Richard Davenport, was a caricature of corporate arrogance. A man who had inherited his position rather than earned it. He was known for his blustering self-confidence and his disdain for the little people who were the lifeblood of his company. He was at a lavish charity gala in Chicago when the news broke his phone buzzing incessantly on the linen-draped table. He initially ignored it, annoyed by the interruption. When he finally did answer, his face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks as his chief financial officer delivered the devastating news. He left the gala immediately, his mind reeling. $5 billion. It was a staggering sum, a blow that would cripple their expansion plans and send a shock wave of instability through the entire company. He demanded to know what had happened, who was responsible for this catastrophic failure. The name he was given was Dr. Serafina James. He didn't recognize it. To him, she was just another passenger, another insignificant cog in the vast machinery of his airline. He had no idea that he had just picked a fight with a woman who could, and just had brought his company to its knees. Back at the airport, Sefi finally boarded her new flight. As she settled into her seat, a sense of weary satisfaction washed over her. She had been wronged, and she had fought back. She had used her power, her influence, to exact a swift and decisive retribution. The world would see that she was not a woman to be trifled with, that there were consequences for disrespect, for discrimination, for the casual cruelty that so often went unchecked. But as the plane took off, soaring into the inky blackness of the night sky, a small, unsettling thought began to creep into the corners of her mind. She had won the battle, but had she considered the full cost of the war? The $5 billion fund was more than just a weapon. It was a dream, a chance to make a real difference in the world. And in her quest for revenge, she had been forced to sacrifice it. A flicker of doubt as small and persistent as a flickering candle in a storm began to grow within her. Had she done the right thing? Or had she in her anger unleashed a force that would have unintended and perhaps devastating consequences? The thrill of victory was already beginning to fade, replaced by a dawning awareness of the complex and treacherous path that lay ahead. The karma she had set in motion was a powerful and unpredictable force, and she had a sinking feeling that its full impact was yet to be felt. The days immediately following what the media in a firestorm of sensationalist headlines dubbed the $5 billion tarmac takedown were a whirlwind of intoxicating vindication for Sefi. The world, it seemed, was on her side. United Airlines' stock didn't just dip, it plummeted in a terrifying near-vertical descent, wiping out billions in market capitalization and sending shockwaves through the aviation industry. The CEO, Richard Davenport, was dragged before a congressional subcommittee. His fumbling, jargon-laden testimony, a masterclass in corporate ineptitude. He was forced into a series of humiliating public apologies, his carefully crafted words of contrition ringing hollow in the face of the financial carnage and the sheer unadulterated schadenfreude of the public. The flight attendant Brenda became a pariah, her name and face plastered across social media, a symbol of petty tyranny and racial bias. She was summarily fired a sacrificial lamb offered up in a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to appease the public outcry. Sefi, in stark contrast, was hailed as a hero, a modern-day David, who had single-handedly brought a corporate Goliath to its knees. She was on the cover of Forbes of Time of Wired. Her story was a potent cocktail of racial justice, female empowerment, and populist rage, a narrative that was as irresistible as it was profitable. She was lauded on talk shows, her calm, articulate takedowns of corporate arrogance becoming viral sensations. For a fleeting, intoxicating moment, she was not just a venture capitalist. She was a cultural icon, a symbol of resistance in an age of corporate overreach. But beneath the glittering surface of this public triumph, a different, more troubling story was beginning to unfold, a story that was not being told on the cable news networks or in the glossy pages of the magazines. The Green Energy Fund, the project that was to be her legacy, the tangible proof that her success was not just for her own enrichment, but for the betterment of the world, was in shambles. While Robert Chen and her other investors had stood by her in a magnificent and very public display of solidarity, the shockwaves from the fund's collapse had spooked the international markets. The consortium of investors she had so carefully, so painstakingly courted, was now hesitant, their confidence shaken. The project, once a shining beacon of hope for a sustainable future, a testament to the power of capital to effect positive change, was now indefinitely stalled, a casualty of the very war Cefi had so decisively won. The first real tremor of unease, the first crack in the facade of her righteous victory, came during a call with Dr. Aris Thorne, the brilliant Nobel laureate scientist whose groundbreaking research in solar energy conversion was the cornerstone of the entire green energy initiative. Was a man who existed in a world far removed from the petty squabbles of corporate titans. His life's work was dedicated to a single noble purpose: saving the planet. Serafina, he said, his voice, usually so full of a quiet academic passion, was heavy with a disappointment that was more piercing than any accusation. I understand why you did what you did. I truly do. On a human level, I applaud you. But the fallout, my God, the fallout is catastrophic. He paused, and in the silence, Cefi could hear the rustling of papers, the sound of a life's work being shuffled into an uncertain future. We were on the verge of a breakthrough, a technology that could have provided clean, affordable energy to millions, to communities that are currently living in the dark, both literally and figuratively. Now we are back to square one. The funding is gone, the momentum is lost, and the planet, he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, continues to burn. His words were a punch to the gut. In her righteous anger, in her quest for personal justice, had she lost sight of the bigger picture? Had she sacrificed the greater good, the future of millions, for the sake of her own wounded pride? The question, once a faint nagging whisper, was now a roaring accusatory shout in the echo chamber of her own mind. The second blow, the one that brought the abstract consequences of her actions into sharp, painful focus, came from an unexpected quarter. A small minority-owned catering company, Taste of the Diaspora, had been awarded the contract to provide food services for the new state-of-the-art green energy research facility that was to be built with the fund's capital. The contract was a game-changer for the company, a chance to expand, to create dozens of new jobs in a community that was crying out for them, a community not unlike the one she had grown up in. The owner, a warm, effusive woman named Maria Rodriguez, had called Cefi a few weeks prior, her voice overflowing with a gratitude that had brought tears to Cefi's eyes. Now Cefi found herself on the receiving end of a very different kind of call. Maria was in tears, her voice choked with a despair that was so raw, so palpable, it felt as if it were reaching through the phone and squeezing the air from Cefi's own lungs. "Dr. James," she sobbed, "we're ruined. We're completely ruined. We took out loans, we hired new staff, we bought new equipment, all on the promise of that contract. We believed in you, we believed in the project. Now, the project is dead, and we are left with nothing but debt. The bank is calling, our suppliers are demanding payment. We're going to lose everything. The house, the business, everything." The weight of Maria's words settled on Cefi like a physical blow. The unintended consequences of her actions were no longer an abstract concept, a regrettable but necessary cost of doing business. They had a face, a voice, a story of shattered dreams. The very people she had dedicated her career to, uplifting the people whose success was supposed to be the validation of her own, were now among the casualties of her war. The karma, it seemed, was not just swift. It was indiscriminate, a ricocheting bullet that was hitting targets she had never intended to aim at. The final and most devastating blow, the one that would shatter the last vestiges of her self-righteous certainty, came from within her own company, from the one person whose opinion she valued above all others. Her star protégé, a brilliant young black man named Marcus Washington, had been a vocal, passionate supporter of her actions against United Airlines. He had seen it as a necessary and long overdue act of defiance. He had also been a key player in the development of the Green Energy Fund, his passion and dedication a driving force behind the project. He had believed in it with a fervor that matched her own. He requested a meeting with her, his face grim, his usual easy smile, a smile that could light up a room conspicuously absent. He sat across from her in her office, the same office where they had spent countless hours strategizing, dreaming, planning the future. "Sefi," he began. His voice strained, his gaze unwavering. "I need to be honest with you. I've been offered a position at another firm, and I've accepted it." The words hung in the air between them, a stunning, unexpected blow. Sefi was speechless. "Another firm, Marcus. You're a partner here. You're the future of this company. Our future." "Am I?" He countered, his voice rising with a passion, a righteous anger she had never heard from him before. "Sefi, I believed in what we were building. I believed in it with every fiber of my being. I believed in the Green Energy Fund. It was more than just a deal. It was a movement. It was a chance to prove that we could do well by doing good. And we sacrificed it. We sacrificed it for a public spectacle, for a moment of revenge." It was about more than revenge. "Marcus," she argued, her voice pleading, a desperate attempt to make him understand, to make herself understand. It was about taking a stand, about fighting against a system that is designed to keep people like us down, a system that humbles us, that humiliates us, that tells us we don't belong. "I know that," he conceded, his voice softening slightly. "And I admire you for it. I truly do. You are the strongest person I know. But at what cost? We had the power to change the world. Sefi, we had $5 billion that could have funded a revolution. We had the power to build something that would have outlasted all of us. And we threw it away. We threw it away to win a battle, a single, solitary battle when we were on the verge of winning the war. I can't be a part of that. I can't be a part of a company that is more focused on tearing down than it is on building up. I need to be a part of something that is building, not just breaking." His words were a mirror, a cruel, unforgiving mirror reflecting a truth she had been desperately, willfully trying to avoid. Her act of defiance, her moment of triumph, her glorious, righteous victory had come at a terrible, unacceptable price. She had won the battle, but in doing so she had lost her way. The very principles that had guided her career, to build, to create, to uplift, had been compromised in her quest for retribution. The departure of Marcus was a turning point. It was a clear and undeniable sign that she had made a grave, a catastrophic error in judgment. The karma she had so eagerly, so righteously unleashed was not just affecting her enemies. It was consuming her own world, threatening to unravel the very fabric of the empire she had so carefully, so painstakingly built. She was left alone in her sprawling mansion, the silence of the empty rooms a deafening testament to her Pyrrhic victory. The accolades, the magazine covers, the public adulation, it all felt hollow, a bitter, mocking reminder of what she had lost. The woman who had once been so certain, so decisive, so in control, was now adrift in a sea of doubt and regret, a sea of her own making. She had sought justice, but had she become an agent of destruction? She had fought against a monster, but had she in the process become one herself? The questions echoed in the silence of her self-imposed isolation, a relentless, unforgiving chorus of self-recrimination. The hard karma she had so eagerly wished upon her enemies had come back to haunt her, a relentless and unforgiving spectre that would force her to confront the darkest, most arrogant corners of her own soul. The path to redemption she knew would be long and arduous, a journey that would require more courage, more humility, and more sacrifice than any business deal she had ever negotiated. The question was no longer whether she could win the war, but whether she could find a way to make peace with herself. And for the first time in her life, she had no idea how to do that. The weeks that followed Marcus's departure were the most desolate of Sifi's life. The sprawling Atherton mansion, once a symbol of her hard-won success, now felt like a gilded cage. The silence within its walls was a palpable entity, amplifying the cacophony of her self-recrimination. The once vibrant hum of Innovate and Elevate, a sound that had been the soundtrack to her ambition, had been replaced by a somber, oppressive quiet. The loss of the Green Energy Fund, a project that was to be the crowning achievement of her career, had been a body blow. But the departure of her most promising protégé, a young man she had seen as the future of her company, was a wound to the soul. It was a clear, undeniable referendum on her leadership, a vote of no confidence from the very person she had hoped to inspire. She found herself adrift in a sea of her own, making the usual clarity of her vision obscured by a suffocating fog of self-doubt. She would sit in her office, the panoramic view of Silicon Valley, a mocking tableau of a world she no longer felt a part of. The accolades and awards that lined her shelves, the framed magazine covers that hailed her as a titan of industry, seemed like relics from a past life, a tribute to a woman she no longer recognized. She had become a ghost in her own success story, a hollowed-out version of the woman who had once been so certain, so decisive, so in control. The evenings were the worst. Alone in the vast emptiness of her home, the silence would give way to the relentless whispers of her own inner demons. The faces of the people she had let down would swim before her in the darkness, the hopeful, determined face of Dr. Aris Thorne, his life's work now in limbo. The tear-streaked, despairing face of Maria Rodriguez, her dreams shattered by the shrapnel of Sefi's war, and the disappointed, disillusioned face of Marcus, his departure a constant, aching reminder of her failure. Sleep offered little respite, her dreams a chaotic montage of her public humiliation and its devastating aftermath. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening, as she was mindlessly scrolling through her emails, a desperate attempt to distract herself from the turmoil in her own mind. An invitation to a fundraiser for a non-profit organization called Second Chances, a group that provided legal aid and support to wrongfully convicted individuals, caught her eye. The invitation had been sent by her old mentor, Dr. Evelyn Reed. On a whim, an impulse born of a desperate need to connect with something real, something meaningful, she decided to go. She arrived at the event, a low-key affair held in a community center in Oakland, a world away from the lavish galas and high-powered conferences that were her usual haunts. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, their faces etched with the stories of struggle and resilience, of hope and despair. There was a raw, unvarnished honesty in the air, a stark contrast to the carefully curated perfection of her own world. She saw Evelyn across the room, her elegant silver hair a beacon of grace and wisdom in the crowded space. As their eyes met, Evelyn's face broke into a warm, knowing smile, a smile that held no judgment, only a profound and unwavering affection. She walked over to Sephi, her embrace a welcome anchor in the turbulent sea of Sephi's emotions. For a moment, Sephi allowed herself to lean into the comfort of her mentor's presence, the carefully constructed walls of her composure crumbling in the face of such genuine warmth. "I was hoping you'd come," Evelyn said, her voice a gentle balm to Sephi's wounded spirit. "I almost didn't," Sephi confessed, her voice barely a whisper, a fragile thread of sound in the noisy room. "I know," Evelyn replied, her gaze full of a profound understanding. "You've been through a fire, my dear, and you've come out the other side a little scorched, perhaps, but not broken." They found a quiet corner away from the chatter of the crowd. Sephi, who had spent a lifetime projecting an image of unassailable strength, found herself pouring out her heart, her guilt, her confusion. The words tumbled out of her, a torrent of pent-up emotion, a raw and honest confession of her own fallibility. Evelyn listened patiently, her presence a steady, non-judgmental comfort, a safe harbor in the storm of Sephi's self-doubt. When Sephi finally fell silent, her confession hanging in the air between them, Evelyn took her hand, her touch both gentle and firm. "You made a mistake, Serafina," she said, her words carefully chosen, devoid of condemnation. "You let your anger, your righteous anger, cloud your judgment. You sought revenge, and in doing so, you lost sight of the bigger picture. You wielded your power like a sword, when what the world needed was for you to wield it like a trowel, to build, to cultivate, to nurture." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "But that does not make you a monster. It makes you human. It makes you a leader who has been humbled, who has been forced to confront the intoxicating, corrupting nature of power. The true test of a leader is not in whether they fall, but in how they rise. The question now is not what you've done, but what you will do. You have a choice. You can let this mistake define you. You can retreat into the fortress of your success and your solitude. Or you can learn from it, grow from it, and use it to become a better, wiser leader." Evelyn's words were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had threatened to consume her. For the first time in weeks, Sephi felt a flicker of her old self. Not the arrogant, untouchable titan of industry, but the resilient, determined woman who had clawed her way up from nothing, the woman who had always believed in the power of second chances. The next day, she went into the office with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet determination that had been absent for far too long. She called a company-wide meeting, the first she had held since the United Airlines incident. She stood before her team, the faces that looked back at her, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. She took a deep breath, and for the first time she spoke not as a CEO, but as a leader who was willing to be vulnerable to admit her mistakes. She apologized. She apologized for the loss of the Green Energy Fund, for the impact it had had on the company's morale and its mission. She acknowledged her own role in the project's demise, her own failure to see beyond her personal quest for justice. "I let you down," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she no longer tried to hide. "I let our mission down, and for that, I am truly sorry. I allowed my personal battle to become our collective loss. I was so focused on winning the war that I failed to see the collateral damage, the very real human cost of my actions. I forgot that our greatest strength is not in our ability to disrupt, but in our ability to build, to create, to uplift. And I promise you I will spend the rest of my career working to earn back the trust that I have broken. Then she laid out her plan for the future. She announced that she was personally funding a new initiative, a foundation that would be dedicated to supporting the very people who had been the unintended casualties of her war. The first grant, she announced, would go to Maria Rodriguez's catering company, Taste of the Diaspora, enough to cover their debts and provide them with the capital they needed to get back on their feet. The second would be a seed fund for a new non-profit to be headed by Dr. Aris Thorne that would allow him to continue his groundbreaking research in solar energy free from the pressures and constraints of the corporate world. She also announced a new direction for Innovate and Elevate. They would refocus their efforts on social impact, investing on funding companies that were not only profitable, but that were also dedicated to creating a more just and equitable world. Our bottom line, she declared, will no longer be measured solely in dollars, but in the positive impact we have on the world. The response from her team was overwhelming. The applause that filled the room was not just for her plan, but for her honesty, her humility, her willingness to take responsibility for her actions. The cloud of uncertainty that had hung over the company began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and a shared commitment to a new, more meaningful mission. It was a turning point, a moment of collective catharsis, a new beginning. Her final act of redemption, and the one that required the most courage, was a personal one. She reached out to Marcus, not to offer him his old job back, but to apologize. She asked him to meet her, not in her office, but at a small, independent coffee shop in his neighborhood, a neutral ground where they could speak not as a CEO and her former protege, but as two people who had once shared a dream. He was hesitant at first, but he agreed. She saw him through the window before he entered, and her heart ached with a mixture of regret and a desperate hope for reconciliation. When he sat down, the tension between them was a palpable thing. She didn't waste time with small talk. She looked him in the eye and said, "Marcus, I'm sorry. You were right. I lost my way. I let my anger and my pride get the best of me, and I sacrificed something truly great in the process. You had the courage to speak truth to power, to hold up a mirror to my own failings, and I was too blind to see it. I am not asking you to forgive me, but I am asking you to believe that I have learned from my mistakes." To her surprise, a slow smile spread across his face. "I've been following what you've been doing, Sefi," he said, his voice warm, with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "The foundation, the new direction for the company. That's the Innovate and Elevate I fell in love with. That's the leader I want to work for." A few weeks later, Marcus returned to Innovate and Elevate, not as a prodigal son, but as a partner in a new, more hopeful future. His return was a symbol of the company's own rebirth, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. Sefi's journey had come full circle. She had been tested in the crucible of her own making, forced to confront the darkest, most arrogant parts of herself. She had learned that true power was not in the ability to destroy, but in the ability to build, to heal, to create. The karma that had hit her so hard had not been a punishment, but a lesson, a painful but necessary course correction on her path to becoming the leader she was always meant to be. The $5 billion tarmac takedown was no longer a story of revenge, but a story of redemption. A story of a woman who had stumbled, who had fallen, but who had found the strength, the grace, and the humility to rise again, stronger, wiser, and more human than before. The world would still remember her as the woman who had brought an airline to its knees. But for those who knew her, for those whose lives she had touched, she would be remembered for something far more profound, as the woman who had learned that the greatest victory is not in winning the war, but in finding a way to make peace not just with the world, but with herself. And in doing so, she had not only reclaimed her company's soul, but she had also rediscovered her own. The story of Dr. Serafina James is a powerful reminder that the path to justice is rarely a straight line. It's a messy, complicated journey filled with unexpected twists and turns. Her quest for revenge, born from a moment of profound disrespect, unleashed a chain of events that no one could have predicted. It's a story that forces us to ask ourselves some difficult questions. What is the true cost of revenge? Where is the line between justice and vengeance? And how do we wield our own power, whether it's big or small, in a world that is so often unjust? If this story resonated with you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, then please take a moment to like this video and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and make you see the world in a whole new way. Your support helps us to continue bringing these important conversations to the forefront. Thank you for watching.